I know everyone's going to be pulling for Mr. Reasonable, aka Dwayne, but there actually are two other units coming out this week. We've got Luartha and Tyytas. So these two units we've been expecting for a while, and I'm going to break down whether or not you should pull for them. As always, I'd like to thank warthevisionscalc.com for all the information I'm using in this video. They've got all the Japanese units and vision cards, etc. So you can go ahead and look ahead at what's to come if you want. Okay, so starting with Tyytas, he is our MR Dark Tank, which is pretty interesting. We only have one other Dark Tank in the game, that's Whisper. So this might be your first entry into that realm, and it is a pretty appealing one, to be honest, because when you have a tank of any other element, you're seriously worried about the opposing element unit being able to tear it apart, aka Lucia tearing apart Mont. Well, with Tyytas, you don't have to worry about that many light units because most of our light units are tanks as well, or most of them are limited. So there's really not that much light DPS out there that you have to worry about, which means that having a dark tank basically saves you from those elemental weaknesses, or at least in my opinion it does. Unfortunately, Tyytas has bigger problems that he has to worry about, but let's take a look at his full kit before we make our final verdict. So he is an MR Dark unit. He's got 3 move, 1 jump. Paladin, Red Mage, and Viking are his jobs. He uses swords and then shield, helm, armor, all the classic stuff. His stats, they're not bad. I mean, obviously he's not supposed to be an attacker. The main place we need to look at is the right side of the image here. So defense is, you know, so it's not super high for a tank, but dexterity and luck aren't terribly low. They are lower than average, but it's an MR unit, so whatever. The agility, that's not good. But otherwise, you know, his HP is fine. Again, for MR, I'm using MR standards for all of this. Overall, he looks pretty neat. And then you look at his master ability, increase pierce resistance 10%. Okay, I'm on board. Increase missile resistance 10%. Yes. Decrease AP consumption 25%. Holy wow, I want this. And then he gets another 15% increase in HP from his board. So there's a lot of stuff going on here, and so far everything looks perfect. Okay, so we do need to talk about his resistances and his TMR. His resistance, of course, he's weak to light, although again, you don't have to worry about that much light out there because, you know, there's Ramza and there's like, when was the last time you saw a Thancred, or, you know, Cecil's obviously around too, but they're far and few between. And then, well, he's got some resistances to slow, to don't move, to poison, I guess, and then he's weak to blind. And then here's the really important part. He has a massive 25% resistance to slash and a 20% resistance to, or sorry, 20% decrease in resistance to magic. And those are really, really big deal. Those are the two most common types of attacks in the game. So for him to be weak to those, and he's a tank, well, that's a really big deal. But he gets 10% pierce and 20% missile resistance, and stacked with his master ability, that's actually 20 and 30. So that's really high, and you can really build a no damage build from those stats, but you have to be 100% certain that you can't run into, you know, slash units or magic units. So he gets a sword for his TMR, and this is actually really cool too. It gives HP, attack, and defense. So you got HP and defense. Those are tanking stats. Previously, we used Gafgarian's Blood Sword TMR because it allowed you to equip, you know, your armor and accessory of your choice, and then it had that off chance it was going to confuse an enemy, which would get you a turn, which is really useful. Well, this has a chance to decrease attack by 40%, then you take less damage, and then you tank longer. That's actually really cool. This sword could be a really big deal for tanks down the road. Getting 10 defense, that's going to be half of what your armor has, half of the 10 is 5, and then add that onto whatever your armor has, and then same thing with HP. Like, it's not bad. Like, this is a really cool TMR. Okay, so passives. This is one of the most interesting parts of Tyytas in his kit. So we've got the Holy Knight's Protection at standard, but then he's Red Mage sub, so he gets initial AP up, and I don't know that we've seen that on a melee, like a non-mage unit yet. So he can start the battle off with 15 AP, which is really, really interesting. He can get more HP from Viking lore, he can get 15% magic resistance from Mage's Protection, and he can get 15% more missile resistance. So he can like completely stack missile resistance, which is insane. Like, there's a lot of hard choices to make here, and I think that obviously, you know, you want that defense, and I'm very tempted for that initial AP up, but you know, you could go a lot of different ways. And then for counters, you get all the, you know, your classic, you get your damage reduction, you get your self-heal, and then magic reflex. So if you were going against teams that were like Pierce, Missile, and Magic, then maybe you would use magic reflex, and then you've got your resistances to cover the Pierce and the Magic, or sorry, the Missile, and then you just hope you dodge some of the magic attacks. I mean, that could be pretty cool. You still have to avoid those slashers though. Okay, Paladin main skills. This is all very, very straightforward. This is all the skills we normally get on tanks. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about this, but it's all there. You know, your Immortal Spirit and your Sentinel and your Taunting Blade, etc. Taunting Blade on the sub means that you want a sub Paladin. For Red Mage, he gets Resistance Break, which is something that's, you know, gives him utility in raids and PvE content for sure. And then for Viking, there isn't really anything here that's a huge deal for a tank. Okay, awesome. So comparisons to other units. We're going to do 2 sets of comparisons today. We're going to do a comparison to MR tanks and then a comparison to UR tanks. So the first tank is Mont, and we can see here that they compare pretty favorably. Mont gets a ton of defense from his master ability, and he also just has some slash resistance. So otherwise, you know, agility very similar, and then the rest of the stats, HP very similar, AP a little less on Tyytas, but you know. And then Dario's our other main MR tank that we see being used, and again, pretty similar, you know, similar agility, similar defense. Better luck on Dario, but yeah. So then again, the resistances, you know, they're just a little bit more favorable on Dario because he has them in the right places, as does Mont for the most part. So Tyytas, he's gotta have his other abilities kind of speak for him, and then that's going to be that AP consumption down and the very specific resistances. And then if we want to compare him to our UR tanks, and then at this point it's like, okay, well yeah, one's an MR unit, one's a UR unit, but you can see right off the bat, like all the stats just higher on your UR tanks. Even agility, although agility on Engelbert's super low, but even resistances, you know, 20%, 25%, 20% on Engelbert for that slash, strike, and projectile, whereas Wall gets a bunch of resist as well. He's only weak to the piercing. So honestly, Tyytas he's gonna be, his main use is gonna be in those very, very specific matchups, which I just don't know if that's useful enough. Next up is Luartha, and she is a very anticipated unit because she is another double gunner and she is fire element. So what we've heard from Cabbage is that she can slay those Agriuses, which is certainly appealing to me. So she's got dual gunner, and soldier as her jobs, and then obviously she equips guns, your hat cloth accessory, all that fun stuff. For her stats, HP very low, attack very high, crit rate always good, very, very, very high dex, luck is fine, agility low, and then no defense or spirit. She gets more attack from her master ability, and then she also gets Ice Killer. Wow, that's amazing. She will get even more attack from her board, so she's going to be able to stack more attack than any gunner that we've had in the game so far. When we take a look at her resistances, it's exactly what you'd expect with your elemental. She gets confuse, slow, and disable resistance, all very useful. And then she gets slash resistance, which is really random, but I don't think it's going to help her that much with that low HP and that the no defense or anything. And then otherwise, like, she's just not that weak to anything, but it doesn't really matter. And you know, it's part of the low HP and then part of her soldier sub that we'll talk about. And then otherwise, she gets guns as her TMR, which is really interesting because she's a UR unit, and we often don't see a weapon as a UR TMR. So these guns are really cool. They've actually got pretty decent attack for a TMR, and they have the 20% chance to inflict stun. and a little bit of accuracy, crit rate. Like, these are fine weapons, especially if you have a lot of gunners and you don't have enough Ras Al Gathis to equip on everybody. You're going to lose out on the attack and the projectile damage up, although she kind of makes up for a lot of that stuff with her high attack. It just depends on, you know, are you putting bells on her? Is she ever going to use her regular attack? And if the answer is I don't have bells and she's using her regular attack all the time, then maybe messing around with the stun is kind of going to be fun, but otherwise she's going to be one-shotting people with her attack, so, or with her skills. So I don't know if you really actually need these guns. It's more of like, hey, here's an extra pair of guns so that you can equip your triple gunner team, which I know you're all working on. All right, passives. So she gets Missile Mastery twice. That's 30 missile attack. She gets Concentrate from Gunner, Tune Up from Dual Gunner, and Self-Sacrifice from Soldier. So she gets another 60% attack on top of everything she already has, and that's where you're going to see, okay, she loses a bunch of resistances. It's going to make her very weak. She can be one-shotted or killed easily by your opponents. But holy, do you have a lot to choose from here. And then counters, Predictive Fire, Counter Shot, Counter Slash. You're going to notice the biggest absent, and maybe you weren't thinking about it, or maybe you were, but yes, Luartha does not have the Ranger sub. She doesn't have any bow attacks. She doesn't have reflex. My goodness. She does, however, have a bunch of really cool dual gunner skills. It's all the same stuff as Lucia, and you can see, you know, your quadruple shot, really nice 4-hit attack, and firing stance, which is just so nice to give missile attack to your allies, and then defense penetration. We always want to see that. The sub skills, Smokescreen, very important for evasion and increasing defense. And if you go evasion, you know, which is not going to be great for her. She's got she's got low luck and low agility, so, you know, maybe there's something messed around with there, but you'll probably sub something else. And then Gunner, so you get all the good skills here. We've got Arm Shot, Leg Shot, and Aimed Fire Council. Those are all really good skills. I kind of like having this subbed because then maybe you can play around with some status effect shenanigans, which would be great. Soldier, it's all very straightforward here. Drain Force is funny that it's included because she has such low HP, but you get Hazard Form, which could be a really nice buff, and you get a different type of attack, which is always good. I mean, the main reason to have Soldier is the self-sacrifice, but having a different type of attack could be useful, maybe not in PvP, but in PvE. Okay, so her Limit Burst, it's a skill that has hits the 3 squares in front of her, it costs a lot of AP, does a lot of damage, and it decreases the agility of the target. So like this is the, it hits the 4 squares in front of her. So looks like a fine LB, has some potential to hit multiple people. It's kind of like Agrius's Candescent Hue, but not going to confuse anybody, thank goodness. Okay, so how does she stack up compared to our other gunners? Well, here's Lucia, and here's Frederica. And you can see better HP on the other 2 gunners. But man, look at the attack on Luartha compared to Lucia and Frederica. And remember that Luartha is getting attack from her master ability, from her board, from self-sacrifice. It's just crazy how much attack she can stack. But then you can see the drop off there on agility from Frederica. Actually higher luck on both, and then dexterity higher too, which is pretty crazy. So the dexterity means that she'll have good accuracy, and she'll also crit more often. So if she is regular attacking with her TMR, trying to stun people, she's also going to be critting and then generating more AP as a consequence, which is very nice as well. Okay, so should you pull? That is the big question for these guys, and we're going to do the pros and cons for both. So pros of Tyytas, he can have 20% pierce resistance, that's with nothing else added. He has 45 missile resist without armors, espers, or VCs. So you can really stack that and go for triple gunner teams and just make sure he keeps hate. AP reduction, I didn't talk about it much, but it's huge. Like, AP reduction is absolutely massive. It means that with that starting initial AP, he could Immortal Spirit, and then he could start Taunting Blade from turn 2 very easily, and then keep on Taunting Blading over and over and over, and you could just keep aggro forever. And if you are against a team that is pierced and or missile based, they could effectively never break through him. So that's kind of crazy. And then Spirit Break on the Red Mage sub has some PvE applications. His cons though, 25 slash resist is too tough to overcome. The minus 20% magic resist can be corrected with the cost of the passive skill, but then you have to use one of your passive slots to go to -5% magic resist, and I don't think that's worth taking up one of his slots. So he's just going to be too niche. For Luartha, well, she's got super high attack and dex. She can use both dual and gunner and just regular gunner jobs, which is amazing. She can stack 30 missile attack naturally, and then the ice killer plus innate elemental advantage against ice units is insane. So she can really deal a bunch of damage to ice units. The cons though, she has low HP and agility, but they're all base stats, which means they scale better off those percentage ups. No ranger means that she'll take a hit on certain maps, like she can't shoot over obstacles. She'll shoot your team in the back if you're in a map where she's behind everybody, and she doesn't get reflex. So those cons though, excuse me, I don't think they actually outweigh her pros at all. Okay, so should you pull? Well, Luartha, yeah, she's completely worth it. She's super high DPS and just has so much applications. If you don't have Lucia, for sure. If you have Lucia, for sure. Tyytas, yeah, I wouldn't pull for him. I'm actually really interested in him on a personal level, and that I want to play around with his resistances, but I can't recommend him to the average player by any means. And this is something I haven't mentioned in all my should you pulls, but I like to play the game that is right in front of me. I don't like to play the game that doesn't exist yet. So in terms of EX jobs and all that kind of stuff, that's not going to stop me from pulling. If it stops you, that's really great, and you can talk about that in the comments, but that's not going to stop my recommendations, because then if we're saying, oh, wait for the EX jobs, then great, I'll make a video and it just says no to everybody. When it comes down to it, we've got our quote from King Elda himself: make your own assessment and then make your decision. Thanks everybody, we'll see you next time.